It's not the mountains we conquer, but ourselves, says Sir Edmund Hillary, the first person to reach the summit of Mount Everest. Following the same principle, Kaamya Karthikeyan, a class 12 student from Mumbai, recently made history by becoming the youngest female in the world to scale the seven highest peaks across the seven continents. In May last year, Kamya successfully reached the summit of Mount Everest, becoming the youngest Indian to achieve this feat. Now, she has raised the bar even higher by climbing the highest peaks in all the continents. Let us hear more about this fascinating journey from Kamya herself. To begin at the beginning, Kamya, how did you develop an interest in mountaineering?
When I was about 3 or 4 years old, my dad, who's in the Indian Navy, was posted in Lonavala, which is considered the lap of the Sahyadris. And there we would go out on small treks every weekend. And from there, when my dad started climbing the bigger peaks of the Himalayas, I was very curious as to what called him back to the mountains time and again. So when I asked my mother this, she said we should go see for ourselves. And she took me on my first Himalayan trek when I was 7 years old in Uttarakhand. And since then, I think the love for trekking and mountaineering has only grown.
Before we talk about your recent achievement, could you please share your journey of scaling Mount Everest last year?
Climbing Mount Everest has been a dream of mine for almost 7 years now, ever since I first trekked to the Everest Base Camp back in 2017. So it was really amazing to be able to climb the peak earlier in May 2024. And I think what made it even more special was that I was climbing the peak with my father and just at 16 years of age. And it was definitely a tough expedition because we were on the mountain for almost 2 months, and there were definitely lots of challenges along the way, like the Khumbu ice fall and some bad weather that we faced right before our summit. But I think the more difficult the climb is, the more fun it is, and the more I get to learn from the mountain. And it's definitely going to be a very special climb. It's a dream of every mountaineer to climb Mount Everest someday. So it's a really special climb and very close to my heart.
Kamya, after scaling Mount Everest, the ultimate dream of all mountaineers, what inspired you to take on the enormous challenge of climbing the seven highest peaks across the seven continents?
In 2017, to celebrate my 10th birthday, we climbed Mount Stokangri in Ladakh, which was my first 6,000-meter peak. And that is usually considered the transition point from trekking to mountaineering. And it was a very long summit climb of about 19 to 20 hours. And I reached the base camp about an hour before my parents after the summit. So when they came in, they saw that after walking for about 20 hours, I was sitting in the tent solving Sudoku and eating Maggie. So my father actually came up to me and asked, Kamya, do you realize what you've climbed is higher than the highest points on four of the continents? And my immediate response to that was, can I climb the other three as well then? So that is how this idea to climb the highest peaks in all the seven continents came. And I think we've come a long way from now, and it's become a true passion of mine.
And Kamya, how did you prepare for this mission, both physically and mentally? What challenges did you face during the preparations?
Physical preparation is usually centered around long distance running, and we live in a 20 floor building, so we climb the stairs a lot of times. So that improves our lung capacity as well as our leg strength. But apart from that, since we're close to the Sahyadri hill range, we venture out on a few treks in the Sahyadris so that we're in touch with the rough terrain. We've also been going to Gulmarg in Jammu and Kashmir for the past 10 years now, earlier to learn skiing and more recently to practice pulling sleds and to practice ski mountaineering. And that is on the physical aspect of the preparation that we do for mountaineering. We also have to do a lot of research and learn about the mountain before we set foot so that we know what to expect during our expedition there. And I think mountaineering is 40% physical, 40% mental, 10% logistics and preparation, and the rest of the 10% is up to the mountain finally. So there are a lot of factors that come into play. Mental strength and resilience is definitely a huge part of it. And I think that only comes from having confidence in yourself and your abilities.
Kamya, I'm sure all these expeditions were unique and different. Could you please tell us about each of these missions in detail?
The first of the seven summits which we climbed was Mount Kilimanjaro, which is the highest peak in Africa. And this was a very interesting climb because the terrain was changing every day. We started from a tropical forest, and the next day the trees reduced to shrubs. The third day it reduced to mere grass, and the fourth day we were standing on the snow capped summit. So it was like a fast track geography class for me, literally. The second climb that we did was Mount Elbrus, which is the highest peak in Europe, and it is in Russia. We were trying to find mountaineering boots of my size, but couldn't find any. And the shopkeepers would often joke as to who would bring such a young kid to climb Mount Elbrus. And finally, we had to settle for a pair of snowboarding boots. And since I wanted to also ski down from the summit of Mount Elbrus, we had to climb wearing snowboarding boots and then sit on the summit in freezing temperatures and change into my ski boots and then ski down. So it was a very interesting experience. The third expedition was to Mount Kosciuszko, which is the highest peak in Australia. And this isn't a very high mountain, it's only a 1 day hike up to the summit and back down. But we had very high winds while we were there, and eventually, on the day that we summited, my mom and I were the only people to summit the mountain. The fourth peak was Mount Aconcagua, and we had a 2 week long struggle even before we could set foot on the mountain, fighting a court case in the Argentinian court just to get the permit. And after that, we set out on the climb and we were climbing strong. But our guides were pitted against us and they sent us back from right below our last camp on the mountain. And we had to go ahead and do the entire expedition a second time. But it definitely taught us to be very, very resilient and mentally strong, and taught us that if we had the willpower to do something, then everything would fall in place for us eventually. The fifth of the seven summits was Mount Denali, which is the highest peak in North America. And this was physically a very demanding expedition because there are no porters on the mountain. And because of that, we have to carry not just our 20 kg backpacks, but also a 50 kg sled with all of our food, equipment, tents, and everything that we need to survive for the 20-day long expedition in the mountain. So it was a huge physical endeavor, but the mountain showed us some of the most beautiful views I've seen in my life. The sixth expedition was Mount Everest, which of course is going to be very, very memorable for me for as long as I can remember it. And it was a wonderful expedition. It was 2 months that we spent on the mountain, and there were definitely difficult sections like the Khumbu Icefall and some bad weather days that we faced. But I think we overall learned so much from the expedition, and it was a dream come true for me of 7 years. And the last of the seven summits was Mount Vinson Massif, the highest peak in Antarctica, which I climbed in December of 2024. This again was similar to Mount Denali in the sense that we were also pulling a sled here for the first day of our climb. And I think it was just so amazing and such a privilege to be there in Antarctica, in such a remote continent. And to get to climb there and see the views from that mountain, I think was absolutely amazing.
So, during this long and exhausting journey, were there any moments when you felt like giving up or backing down?
I don't think I've ever felt like giving up or backing down. While we're on the climb, there are definitely times when you're extremely tired and you ask yourself things like, why am I doing this to myself? I could be, sitting back home comfortably. But I think the moment we finish that climb and come, we start planning for the next expedition because I think it's just the passion that keeps driving us, and the mountains just keep calling us back all the time.
And when you scaled the seventh and final peak in Antarctica and achieved your goal, what was it like? What went through your mind at that moment?
It was an absolutely amazing feeling. I mean, this was a mission that we'd set out on 7 years ago. And to see that all that hard work was reaching a massive milestone, I think was such an important moment for us. And to be able to summit that peak along with my dad, I think was the best feeling in the world.
So, Kamya, what are your future plans and ambitions? I think completing the Explorer's Grand Slam is one of those milestones. Please tell us more about it.
To complete the Explorers Grand Slam challenge, I have to ski to the North and South Poles as well. So I'm looking forward to doing that in 2025 to become the youngest person in the world to complete the Explorers Grand Slam. That is a record that is currently held by a 21-year-old climber. And in the long term, I hope to climb a lot more in the Indian Himalayas. There are so many mountains here that I think even a lifetime is not enough to climb all of them. So I definitely like to explore and climb as many of them as I can.
Dear listeners, I think Kamya's inspiration can be encapsulated by a beautiful quote from Greg Child, an Australian mountaineer and author. He says, "Somewhere between the bottom of the climb and the summit is the answer to the mystery of why we climb." Let us wish Kamya all the very best for her future endeavors and expeditions. And now it's time for me to say goodbye. We will connect again with another exciting subject. Till then, have a nice day.